Alex, I finally figured out why they call it crown molding. It's because by the time you're done trying to make those four corners meet in a room that's shaped like a crushed cereal box, you feel like you've survived a medieval siege. I spent my Saturday wrestling with 12-foot lengths of prime pine in a hallway that was about as square as a puddle of water.
Oh, here we go. The weekly battle of Tiger versus the right angle. Let me guess. The hallway won the first 3 rounds?
It was a technical knockout. I walked in there with my shiny tape measure and a heart full of hope, thinking, it's just four walls. How hard can it be? Fast forward 2 hours, and I'm standing on a ladder, covered in white dust, staring at a gap in the corner that you could throw a frisbee through. The ceiling had a dip in it that looked like a hammock, and the walls were waving at me.
See, this is why I like flat surfaces. Why do we do this to ourselves? We take a perfectly fine room and decide it needs three-dimensional wooden jewelry bridging the gap between the wall and the ceiling. It sounds like a geometric nightmare from the jump.
It really is a leap of faith. Most trim sits flat against one surface, but crown lives in that spring angle. It's leaning out into space, bridging two different planes. If the wall isn't plumb and the ceiling isn't level, that crown is going to twist. And when crown twists, the miter joints look like they're scream crying.
Okay, but people see the pros do it on those home Reno shows, and it looks like they just snip, snip, nail, and boom, stately manner. What's the stuff they're cutting out of the edit? What's the actual foundation for not losing your mind?
Well, for starters, you've got to stop trusting your house, to be honest with you. Your house is a liar. It's moved, it's settled, the drywall guy used too much mud in the corners. You can't just set your saw to 45 degrees and expect a miracle. The biggest thing I've started doing, and this is a total game changer, is installing backing first.
Backing? Like extra wood behind the pretty wood? Isn't that just more work?
It's the sleep well at night insurance policy. I take some scrap 2x4s and rip them down into triangular blocks on the table saw. I nail those into the top plate of the wall every 16 inches or so. Now, when I bring that floppy piece of molding up there, I have a solid target to nail into wherever I want. I'm not hunting for studs like I'm searching for water in a desert with a divining rod.
That makes sense. I've definitely seen people frantically poking holes in the drywall with a finish nailer trying to find something solid. It sounds like a woodpecker on caffeine.
Precisely. And the backing also keeps the crown from rolling. If you don't have that solid wedge back there, you might nail the bottom tight, but leave the top gapping, or vice versa. It keeps the spring angle consistent. If that angle changes even a fraction of a degree between the left side of the room and the right, your corners will never, ever close.
Speak to me about the saw, though, because every time I see crown being cut, someone says the phrase upside down and backwards, and my brain immediately stops functioning. Is there a way to do this that doesn't require a PhD in spatial reasoning?
It's a mental hurdle, for sure. When you put the crown on the saw, you're basically pretending the bed of the saw is the ceiling and the fence is the wall. It feels like you're trying to rub your belly and pat your head while reciting the alphabet backward. But once you realize that the bottom of the molding, the part that sits on the wall, needs to be pointing up towards the ceiling of your shop while you cut, it clicks. Eventually.
Eventually is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, Tiger.
Fair point. But here's the real pro move. I don't use miters for inside corners anymore. I cope them.
The forbidden art.
It sounds intimidating, but it's actually more forgiving than a miter. You run one piece of crown dead flat into the corner. Then, on the second piece, you cut a miter as if you were going to join them, but then you take a coping saw and literally carve out the back of that profile. You're following the wiggly line that miter cut created.
So you're basically making a puzzle piece that fits over the face of the first board?
Exactly. And the magic of it is that if the walls are 89 degrees or 92 degrees, it doesn't matter. The cope joint just slides right over and stays tight. It's like the joint has a little bit of give to it. It's the difference between trying to shove two Lego bricks together at an angle versus sliding a glove over a hand.
I remember you telling me once about reveals in trim work. Does that apply here, or is crown strictly about hiding every single gap?
Oh, reveals are the secret sauce of all trim carpentry, not just crown. It's that tiny little step you leave, maybe an eighth of an inch, where two pieces meet. If you try to make everything perfectly flush, the human eye will find every single half millimeter of error. But if you intentionally create a shadow line, a little reveal, it masks the tiny discrepancies. On a door frame, it's essential. On crown, the reveal is usually where the molding meets the ceiling or a cabinet.
You mentioned cabinets. People love putting crown on the top of their kitchen cabinets, but those aren't exactly attached to the studs. Is that a different beast?
It's more of a finesse game. On cabinets, you're often dealing with a subcrown or a riser first, basically a flat board you attach to the top of the cabinet box so the crown has something to sit on. The biggest mistake people make there is trying to nail directly into the cabinet face frame. You'll split that wood faster than a lightning bolt hits a pine tree. Small brads and a little bit of glue are your best friends there.
Glue? I thought we were just nailing things until they stayed put.
If you only use nails, the wood will eventually decide it wants to go back to being a tree and start moving. I like to pre-assemble my outside corners on the ground. I'll glue them, pin them with tiny micro brads, and let them dry into one solid L shape before I ever take them up the ladder. It's much easier to fight the wood at waist height than it is while you're balancing on a plastic step stool with a heavy nail gun in your hand.
That feels like the adulting version of woodworking. No more holding it with your shoulder while trying to aim the gun.
Exactly. I've been that guy. I've stood there with a 12-foot piece of crown on my head, trying to reach the trigger, looking like a very frustrated wood-themed unicorn. Not my finest hour.
Okay, let's talk about the ugly side. What happens when you've done your best, you've coped, you've backed, and there's still a gap? You know, that one corner that's just cursed. When is it okay to reach for the caulk gun?
There is no shame in the caulk game, but there is a limit. A good carpenter uses caulk to seal the joint. A bad one uses it to rebuild the molding. If your gap is wide enough to house a family of spiders, you need to go back to the saw. But a tiny hairline fracture, that's where a good acrylic caulk makes you look like a hero.
Use it to hide the sins, but don't commit the sins on purpose.
Spot on. And here's a tip most people overlook. Don't use your tape measure for everything. I know that sounds like heresy, but for short runs, just hold the actual molding up to the wall and mark it with a sharp pencil right where it hits the corner. Story sticks, or marking in place, will always be more accurate than trying to read 47 3/16 on a tape that's sagging in the middle.
It really is a game of millimeters. It's funny how the biggest molding in the house requires the smallest tolerances.
It's the paradox of the craft. You're moving big, heavy sticks of wood, but you're treating them like fine jewelry.
So, if I'm starting my first crown project this weekend, what's the one thing I should take away from this? Besides, my house is a liar.
I'd say give yourself permission to waste a few feet of wood. Cut some test pieces, maybe 6-inch scraps, and use them to test your corners before you cut that expensive 16-foot long board. It's like a rehearsal. Once you see how the test pieces fit, the real thing doesn't feel nearly as scary.
Rehearsal for the crown. I like it.
And remember, if the first joint isn't perfect, just walk away for 5 minutes. The wood isn't going anywhere, but your sanity might if you stay on that ladder too long. There's no piece of trim worth a broken spirit.
Spoken like a man who has definitely had a moment with a piece of pine.
More than one, Alex, more than one. Thanks for hanging out in the den today. Go make something beautiful, and maybe keep the caulk gun on standby, just in case.
Just in case the hallway wins again. See you next time.